Hello and welcome back to another masterclass. We're so excited to have Dr. Jody Carrington with us. Welcome, Dr. Jody.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
It's
we're
been so
excited.
long.
It's been way too long, way too long. So we had Dr. Jody speak at the Institute, as I was saying, years and years ago when her babies were little. So I feel so happy that you're back. I'm like, yay, you're back.
Oh my gosh, that was a long time ago, right? That was in Edmonton.
Yes, it was in Edmonton, and I remember you had to. There was so little. You dropped them off somewhere at somebody's house. I don't know if it was your mom. You had to drop them off somewhere. You drove down. You did this incredible presentation. It was just in those years when there's so much going on.
Oh my gosh, yes. And then we were just talking about this before we started. Then now they're 12. That's fantastic. Oh my gosh. Yes. So many things.
So today let me just, for people who don't know Dr. Jody Carrington, quick introduction. Dr. Carrington is the founder and principal psychologist at Carrington and Company. She's written 3 amazing best-selling books. We're going to be chatting about feeling seen today. I have so many questions. Jody speaks a ton all over globally. And she has a really wonderful podcast called Everyone Comes From Somewhere. I love your background, Jody.
Yeah, it's now called Unonely. The first season was Everyone Comes From Somewhere. Yeah, that's okay. And then this season is Unonely. It's just, we just evolved it. Yeah.
Are you changing the name each season or?
I think we're going to stick with Unonely. It was like the first season, as you know, in this podcast world, you're like, okay, what are we going to do? What do we have to offer to the world? Because everybody seems to have a podcast. So what's going to be fantastic? And the first season was just really about, how can we get back to this sort of piece of empathy, knowing that, we're way more alike than we are different. Everybody comes from somewhere. And then the second season has been more about like, how do we sort of answer this question of disconnection? And it really comes down to loneliness, I think. And so we just got 24 experts globally to talk about what do we need to do to become unlonely again in this very disconnected world. So it's been a bit of a shift, but it's all the same stuff, right? It's all like, what you talk about around here all the time is really like, we were never meant to do this alone. If the big people aren't okay, the little people don't stand a chance.
Totally.
So, it's, yeah. So anyways, here we are.
Unlonely. Why is unlonely not a word in the dictionary? It's so beautiful.
Oh, I know. Hey, it's what we need.
So talking about being unlonely, Jody, your book, Feeling Seen. It's funny, even just the name of it, I think everybody has this visceral experience when you think about being seen. It felt sense of being seen.
Yeah, I think it was so interesting because, when we were writing it, it was like, okay, so what is the thing that the world needs right now? And oftentimes, you do this when you create any kind of content. It's sort of like usually the stuff you need to hear, you need to read, you need to dive deeper on or understand more. And so I think, for a very long time, I started out in this business as doing police psychology, talking about trauma in organizations. And I was a civilian member of the RCMP for a while. And I really realized what it looks like when, organizations don't look after their people. And I think we do an awful job of looking after first responders in this country, and a worse job of looking after the people who hold them. And you're only as okay as the people who hold you. So when I left the RCMP, I decided, I'm really going to focus on police psychology and what is, it looks like a trauma in organizations. And then when I did my residency in Nova Scotia, I had to do a rotation with kids, and they were like, listen, you have to do this rotation with kids. And I was like, I'm not a fan. And I'm still not a huge fan of kids. But I fell in love with the neurodevelopmental process of what happens in trauma, or when, we start to learn that big people aren't okay, or people who are at the helm maybe, aren't the ones that we needed them to be. And so then I was 10 years at the Children's Hospital on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit. That's where I took my, the first decade of my career, really trying to get a better sense of like what it means to be human and why do some of us do better than others. And it always comes down to relationship. And I think that in this season, there has never been such a paucity of relationship in the history of humans. And we've never had this much access to resources and research, but we're dying faster. We're killing ourselves faster from emotional illness than from physical illness for the first time in history. And so the question then becomes, what is it about this human experience that is becoming more and more difficult? And I think it really comes back to this idea of loneliness, of, people ask us often as therapists, like what is going on with this mental health crisis? Why does everybody have the ADHD and the autism? And, how come depression and anxiety is so massive? Like, what about this mental health crisis? And I actually don't think we're in a mental health crisis. I think we're in an understandable human response to a loneliness epidemic, because we're neurobiologically wired for connection. You disconnect from an infant, they die. That is not going to change. But what has changed is how much we share proximity or direct connection to each other. It's estimated that our great-grandparents looked at their children 72% more of the time than we look at our babies today. And the only way you learn that you matter, right? The only way you learn how to regulate emotion is somebody has to show you. They can't tell you. So this loneliness, I think, is the focus of, what really is happening in this sense of disconnection and mental health crisisery.
That's the disconnect, the loneliness. I think for all parents listening in, what they want deeply for their children is to feel connected, to feel loved, to feel seen. What's happening? Like, where is this coming from?
I think it's really easily measurable, in so many ways. And we can blame all kinds of things, but I think since the introduction of the smartphone in 2006, we've seen a massive decline in the mental wellness of our children. The introduction of the forward-facing camera happened in 2009. So the absorption of what's happening here within our own self versus how we stay connected to other people has become significantly distorted. And I think that, that's one situation. I think that also, kids have less access to friendships. Kids have less access to parents, grandparent figures. There's much more single parent households than ever before in history than there are in this moment. Kids experience less sibling relationships. All of those opportunities to develop the social skills necessary to do well in this world have become significantly compromised, not just in, over the course of multiple generations, but more so significantly in the last decade. And equally as so, I think that I don't think we ask the right question. I think we ask all the time, what is wrong with kids these days? And so John, hates work. I'm sure you're familiar with the anxious generation, speaking a lot about holy moly, what's going on with kids these days. And I often ask this, when I get to speak, I spoke with educators globally and I keep saying to them, what have you noticed about kids these days? If you've been doing this work as a therapist or a mental health provider or a child care provider, a parent, like whatever, tell me, what have you been noticing about kids in the last 10 years? Are kids different? So there's often a resounding, yep, they are. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of response about, they're entitled, they're overscheduled, they have little ability to sort of make decisions on their own. There seems to be a lack of motivation, an addiction to devices. They don't seem very compliant, all of these things, right? And so like often this is shared and, arms are crossed and like they're, life sucking cayuse kind of thing. And so then the next question is, what have you noticed in parents these days? Has there been a shift in those of us doing, interacting with parents? If you're a teacher, if you're best friends, you look at your children's friends' parents and people are like, well, they too, all of those things, right? Overscheduled, anxious, depressed, disconnected, all of those things. Shocking. Apple and tree. The kids are not the problem. Never in the history of the world have the kids been the problem. Right? Because you can't give away something you've never received. So now if we are overscheduled, overwhelmed, so much access to technology, we never, ever, ever get a break from people. We're not designed. We're developing beyond human capacity, right? So we wake up in the morning, generally all of us, connected to our devices.
Yep, check your
Many
email.
of us charge our devices by our beds. We can't even pee without sort of checking on the status of other people, or maybe somebody texted us overnight. Is our parents okay? Are our partners okay? What's going on with our employees, our businesses, our companies? And that data is inundated and put into like before we even pee.
Yep.
So shoulders are up, right? And then we're like, I'm just going to check on the social. So I have access now to everybody else's life. So I'm like, and nothing in there lowers your cortisol, right? Nothing in there is like, oh my God, look at her. She's so amazing. We're like, fuck you. Oh my God, that bitch is already working out. And then, you're like, oh, how did she? Oh my God, why did Mel's book do so?
Yeah.
I'm like, I got to drink collagen. I mean, I woke my husband up in December like 3 times like this. I was like, we need family pictures. And
I hear you. Yep.
So before that even so this is the big people of the world are like this, right? Including educators and police officers and childcare professionals and like parents. Mm-hmm. So then we come out and just sort of try to start the day with our children. And this has happened to me countless times. The kids are then asking asinine questions like, what's for breakfast? And like, where's my agenda? And I'm like, I don't know. And then we strap on an Apple Watch, sit in front of a computer where there's shots of cortisol that are happening every second. Right? We get notifications On here, it's like, okay, so my husband didn't make it to the airport. He missed his flight. My dad is not doing well. My kids, I was in session today and I rarely take my phone in anymore. But because we had a sleepover, I just said to my patient, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to keep this right here because there's lots of things going on and by no means, disrespect, whatever. Phone rings. So I have to excuse myself in a moment because it is my 14-year-old son's best friend's phone calling me. So panic. Right? Now, if we think about one generation ago of people who do our work, nobody had access to you.
No, never.
Like, if something was drastically wrong, we would figure that out when we were done the session.
Absolutely.
But now I am there in front of this human that I've agreed to serve, and I am not good enough to be able to disregard what's happening in the people I love to stay connected to them, right? Which is why, the conversation about phones in schools, technological, options for childcare workers. Why do you have access to your phone when you're serving other people's children? Because you're not good enough to defy what is in here, what is capable, because everything I love and I know to be true is here. Right? Yeah. So it is so difficult to disconnect from that place and stay present with other human beings that I think we're stepping into this place of, a radical response is going to be necessary. We thought that smoking was good once too, until we garnered more data. And now that we're garnering more data and watching the mental health of our babies drop significantly, we're watching burnout rates fly through the roof, the lack of capacity to serve other humans. And here's the thing that won't change, right? We're just walking each other home. Ram Dass said that we are all just here walking each other home. Nobody gets out of here alive. We cannot do any of this alone. And it's so hard, I think, as we watch the next generations unfold, or even for the rest of my career, it will be the constant reminder that all we need is each other. And in order to get back to that, we need to rest. Not work harder, not hustle harder, not, we've all been, this is where we come from, this place of like, you nap, you're lazy. But society had built in infrastructures even earlier in my life. Like I say to our kids all the time, your dad and I are older than Google.
Yeah.
Right? So like I didn't grow up with that experience. I also grew up in a place where Sundays were sacred. And Sundays now, like this Sunday, my kids have 3 hockey games. So not only do we like go all week and serve other people and write books and, hang on to other people's big emotion while we manage our own children and our own aging parents who can like access us at any second of any moment, including the teams we're running and all the things. When we come home, we don't stop. The 40-hour work week's asinine. Because my patients some of them still have access to me. My parents, obviously, our children, anybody who's on my team. And so there's no capacity to put it down. My favorite place, which I think is funny to me, is on a plane because nobody can get me. I'm on a flight 200 times a year, probably. And I love it. People are like, is it hard to travel? I'm like, no. Thank you. Because, you can now sign up for the Wi-Fi, but if at all humanly possible, I don't. Because that's just my permission to like, well, if something happens to my kids or my parents or, whatever, there's nothing I can do until I get back. And so the body keeps the score. So if you think about your dad would have walked through the door at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever, at the end of their day, their shift, one generation ago, there was a visceral sense of safety if their home felt that way because nobody could get them. And maybe people would call them the home phone, but I remember we had the rule even on our house, in Viking, Alberta, Canada, that you didn't answer the phone during dinner. So your body knew that there was a sense of safety in that place. There's no place we can go now that tells our body that we're inaccessible. So you can rest.
Yeah, it's so true. It's funny. Johannesburg, South Africa is where I grew up. And same thing, like Sundays, no one did anything. I remember these long, it was hot in South Africa often. Yeah. These long, hot Sundays where like the afternoon would just almost like feel like it was lasting forever. Yeah. I have this like memory sometimes that Star Trek of all things would be like on in the background. The rugby would be playing, but it was just hot and long and hazy. And you had to entertain yourselves too. My mom was not down on the floor playing with us. Like I might now be in my 1 hour free on the Sunday between all of the soccer matches or whatever we're involved in, where now I'm like, okay, now I have to play with the girls. Like the pressure never stops. So even connecting becomes a little bit of a job sometimes. So I was like, okay, we've got 20 minutes and you've really been asking me to play with your Barbies all week, so let's get down and play with those Barbies.
Yeah, and you're like, okay, And she does this and then they're dead. Okay, everybody up.
Damn, time for coffee. But it's so true. Everything is so hyper scheduled, and in your book, you talk so beautifully about emotion regulation and how that's at the core of wellness. And I know, like, even in our house this morning, 20 minutes before we want to go to school, like, I've scheduled everything. So now it's time for breakfast and we brush our teeth. Suddenly one of the little ones was like, oh, I have to practice my times tables for school. And she like pulled out her multiplication table. And I was like, no, not now. But there's no space for anything that's off course of what's actually plotted out. And so what's happening in terms of emotion regulation for everyone there?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, and I know your community knows this, but the definition of emotional regulation is how to stay calm, how not to lose your friggin' mind, how to stay calm in times of distress or big emotion. Okay. And it is the greatest predictor of wellness in our children. So oftentimes when I ask people, what is your hope for your child? They're always like, I just want them to be happy. And that's so dumb, right? Because nobody's happy all the time. None of us wake up in the morning and are like, oh, I'm just so happy. I'm so happy with the one I married. I'm so happy with my body. I'm so happy that I drank a bottle of wine last night. Like, none of us are happy. And so the greatest wish I ever have for your children and mine are the capacity to feel all the emotions. And that requires some exposure to all of the emotions. It requires a comfortableness for us big people, for them to be sad, to be unhappy, to be rejected, to be bullied, to be not chosen, to be anxious, to be depressed, to be sad, whatever those things are. Huh? And oftentimes we have such a desire to fix and to get back that we do not do a very good job of just walking them back home. Of holding space for that emotion. And that's where the greatest lessons come, because it's not about avoiding all of the bad stuff. You can't, you're not that good. Like, you cannot protect your child from loss. You cannot protect your child inevitably from, getting rejected or bullied. It's like, how do you walk them through that when, not if it happens? And when we have the capacity to stay calm, then that's the greatest teacher. Because when your baby comes to the door and says like, oh my God, this person said this about me today, or my teacher said I'm dumb and stupid and I will never ever pass grade 5. My capacity to just stay regulated is very clearly from those who came before me and were able to give it to me. So you can't give away something you never received. So if you come from multiple generations of abuse, neglect, trauma, if the people around you have often been very dysregulated, which often happens in very like fear-inducing states, but marginalization, when you have to be at the end of your seat all the time because you're not sure the world is safe, it's very difficult to give that to the people in front of you. If you survived war, if you've been in refugee camp, like any of those kind of experiences means that it doesn't mean that you don't have the capacity. It means that understandably, some of us don't. And so then the question then becomes, how do we give that to our children? Often the focus is on us first. And so people, I know that people ask you this all the time, but people say this to me often. Can you see my kid? Can you just see I'm so worried about them. They have suicidal ideation, they're ODD, they're CD, they got, LMNOP, QRS, like they're hitting, kicking, biting, screaming, and doing all the things. And I'm like, oh my God, I would love to see your child. Yes, tell me more. And then I always say, but I need to see you first. And the question is this then, you think I'm the problem? And I say this, no. As I'm nodding my head, no, you're the solution. You're the solution, because I can see your kid in therapy, gold standard treatment. Okay. I could see them for an hour. I'll charge you $220 an hour, 1 hour a week. I will get to know your baby. And I need to do this. I need to assess their story before we can ever make a diagnostic picture. But the most critical piece of that picture is the system in which it's occurring. And so when I understand the resources that might be required to get you to understand how amazing you are, how competent you are, how important you are in the life of your child, that their job is to be assholery-ish. Their job is to tell you to F off or get bent, or they don't like you or they hate you, or to slam doors and steal things or get arrested or whatever they're doing. That's their job. Our job is to walk them through it again and again and again. Doesn't mean you tolerate the bullshit. It means not if you're going to teach it when. And so that piece often is most effectively done with big people, which is why I spend the vast majority of my career speaking to teachers and police officers and leaders in Fortune 500 organizations. Because if the big people are okay, the people they love or they lead will be too. And so this constant intervention of like, are we doing enough for the kids? Are we doing enough for, this group or that group? Beautiful questions, right? But you can invest, particularly in the institution of education, you can invest all you want into programs and Chromebooks and all of the things. If you don't care for the teachers and the EAs and the custodians and the bus drivers, they will struggle to teach our children.
Oh.
So the kids are not the problem.
And so beautiful. And Jody, I know that this is an area that you're so passionate about, is this model of kind of self-care that we've sold is so different from what you're talking about right now. What you're talking about is, how do we truly look after you? How do we create a space where you can hold the craziness of the world without numbing out through a phone, through alcohol, through a shopping addiction, whatever it may be? How do we create spaces where you can be okay?
Yeah. And I think it's like, so this concept of burnout really comes up a lot. And it's like, the definition of burnout is really quite simple, right? Like when the resources outside of work intended to fill your soul, right, to refuel you, are not greater than those that get sucked from your soul at work, you burn out. Like, shocking. Like, it's so simple. And it's not like, Freudenberger came up with this theory in 1974. This is not new. He was sort of looking at a drug addicted population at the time, and it didn't even start in the place of organizational stress. What he learned is that people who use drugs excessively in the addiction space, we started to colloquially call them burnouts, because they looked like they felt incompetent. They lacked confidence. They felt futile in their efforts. Like, what's the point? I'm a shitty dad. I can never be good enough in this way. I've screwed everything up, so I'm just going to numb. And Freudenberger started noticing the same things were happening in organizations. They looked like the burnouts that we've seen in the space of addiction. And so he was like, okay, what is this concept of burnout in organizations? And he said, what you see is the same thing. There is a futility that sets in, like, what's the point? We're not going to make a difference anyway. And emotional exhaustion has set in, which leads to a lack of compassion. So it's those three things we see in people who are burnout: emotional exhaustion, lack of compassion, and an experience of futility, which means that the idea isn't that we have lost our ability to be great. Your job is not a function of burnout. You can, like, more people don't burn out from specific jobs per se. The greatest predictor of burnout is your ability, or lack thereof, to refuel, to rest, to really put things back on, whose opportunity is. What is it? Is it your job to single-handedly undo the mental health system of Southern Alberta? No, ma'am. Are you good enough to undo racism and marginalization in this world? No, ma'am. And when you consider that, I mean, I often think about this when I left the Children's Hospital. Like, when I left there, that was the hardest, for sure, almost decade of my career, or mostly because I was young and I was creating, the stories about how to do this work. So I felt incompetent most days. And I would come early, stay late, get kicked, hit, skips, bit, all the things, and just learning this process of the dynamic. And so when I left the Children's Hospital, I was like, you're welcome. Like, I devoted a decade of my life, and it, honestly was so difficult in so many ways. So I thought that maybe they'd name a wing after me or something, or maybe have a lunch. No, ma'am, not a thing. So I left there with twins in my belly and my little box of trinkets that I had collected. And I remember walking past the nurses' unit on my way out. And I remember thinking, lids are still flipping. There's still a mental health crisis on our hands. There's still really unwell babies. There's still a massive, disproportionate amount of racism that is happening in the system. Oh my gosh, did I even do anything here? And the point of it is that we will never undo this. Our job, when we're in service to other people, as parents, as teachers, as educators, as, any human services professions, is just to give them the best we can on any given day, to try to rewrite that story that you are not in this alone. And when you understand that that is your only job, you just give them the best you can with what you got on any given day, and it's got to be enough. There's an elder in the Yukon that taught me this, an Indigenous elder who taught me this earlier this year, and it was the most profound thing. She said to me, the most important people you work for are the ones you go home to. Isn't that great?
So beautiful.
Melanie.
It's so beautiful. Jodie, I think too, when we kind of come back to going, hold on, we're at our best when our hearts can rest, when our souls can rest, it also it opens up so much space to be able to see our children, to see the people that we love, to see our own creativity. But I think when everything is tight, it's so much harder to do that.
So true, right? And this is I often think about this because I've really considered this work. I mean, when I've done lots of work with first responders, police officers in the world of trauma, the only thing that works in my mind is a somatic process. So like EMDR, or the place where we sort of get back to the unconscious mind of what is happening in the body, because the body keeps score. Okay. So what happens is we can do this topical stuff all day long. You can journal and you can deep breathe and all the shit, do yoga, whatever you want. But the idea is, where do you feel it in your system? And I think oftentimes we are completely, we're like, we just did yoga, we drank some kale, but you do the whole thing and your body's still like this, right? And then you go home and watch Dateline to try to relax,
Yeah.
And that does, I mean, your body, when it watches Dateline, it has no idea that that's a show. It got no idea that that young woman in Tallahassee who left the bar alone and got murdered, like, is not happening in this moment. So, of course the adrenaline, the fear of it all, we sort of are engaged in that process. But I see this so often that people, and I do this so often, not even see it. I'm like, at the end of the night, I'm going to watch Yellowstone. I'm going to, like, this is what I did last night till 2:00 in the morning, because I could not, shut it off. And then I'm just like this. And then we try to go to bed. People say this to me all the time. I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't rest. I can't sleep. Maybe I'm going through the change. No, we spend our entire day like this, and we're getting buzzed on here and dinged on here and ready to do the next thing. And then at the night time, we start to process how our babies are and whether we responded to this email well, and what is as for supper tomorrow, and we got to get them there, and and we're so exhausted that some of us just fall into sleep and then wake up at 2 spinning, because we give ourselves no stillness to process. In fact, quiet becomes scary. So we have noise machines and CPAP machines and all the things to try to block out the noise. And what we're doing often is not feeling it. And this, Dan Siegel says this, you have to name it to tame it. You have to give it some space in order for it to move through. And if we're constantly inundated by all the noise and the busyness and the expectations of how we're failing our children and our husbands and our wives and, whatever else, there's very little time to sort of give the neurophysiology of who is you a rest.
Yeah. And I think, Jodie, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about our kids as well. I think that when we have these very, very busy parents whose physiology never rests, and then you have kiddos who never have to have those raw conversations and actually look somebody in the eye and say, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, I totally messed up. That lots of our kids are missing those vulnerable moments, or they're always given a participation trophy. So they have these adults who are too busy to really feel their feelings. And then we have these kids who don't have adults feeling their feelings and who live in a world where we can hide constantly, where you never have to go like, oh, I completely lost that race, whatever it is. Our kids never experience those deep, deep emotions, I think, until it gets really bad, until maybe mom dies later on, or something happens in their world where they go, whoa, what's that feeling? Because I'm not familiar with it.
100%. And you need that script to sort of know what to do about it. And so then, oftentimes I think then as parents, we fall into this big guilt phase, which is like, oh my gosh, like, I've messed them up. I see this so many times in any of the talks that I do, right? When we start to talk about the neurophysiology behind emotional regulation, that, kids turn their needs up and up and up until we sort of meet them. And I can see parents just processing like, oh my God, how many times have I missed the cues? How many times? Oh my Lord. Like, how many times I think my own baby is, will grab my face when I'm on the phone. They're 14 and 12 now. Like, and they're like, hey, look at me. Right. And I'm like, I am doing very important mental health work here. And they're like, okay, when you're done, I'll be right. I was like, but the idea is so clear that we weren't meant to do any of this. So, like, I often show this video, the still face video with Ed Tronick, which, this is such pivotal work in our space, right? Where, like, it just shows if you go flat in the face of like an 18-month-old, a 9-month-old, you just do not respond for 2 minutes. Their body, they start to collapse in and of themselves. They'll screech and they'll get their motorbike fists going. They'll do anything they can to sort of pull you back in. And it just gets louder and louder until eventually they'll just collapse even in their posture. And this is not unlike our 12-year-olds and our 16-year-olds, when they need to process what has happened. And it's often not at the best times. It's often at night. It's in the car when we got to get somewhere. It's right before school. It's all of those times where we're like, oh my. And so oftentimes it's like, so then the question becomes, what do we do about this? And I would say, it's it's really not as scary as we think it is. I don't think we are really that far gone as we feel some days we are. The data around, assisting kids in emotional regulation is quite clear. You only need to get it right 30% of the time. That's the Circle Security guys wrote that in one of their first books. And I was like, I hang on to it and I quote it. Like I talk about it all the time, because you can screw this shit up a lot, and we will, because we're overwhelmed and exhausted. And so I think what happens first is really for us parents to sort of drop our shoulders and understand that, like, generally speaking, in each of our bodies in this moment, we have everything that our kids need. We just sometimes lose access to it. So when we know that to be true, if we believe that to be true, then we're so much farther ahead, because even that will give us enough motivation to just show up. Right? To give the best we can with what we got. You don't need to read another book. You don't need to take another course. You don't need to be some friggin' super model human. It is just really doing the next best right kind thing as much as you can. And I know that I am a better parent. I mean, I often say this about kids these days. It's the first book that I wrote. It's a national bestseller, best fucking parenting book I've ever read. Every time I read it, I'm like, that is so good. If you watch me with my own kids, you wouldn't buy the book. Because I wrote it when I was regulated. Right? Like, has this ever happened to you? Like, you're out in public and people may know who you are, and you're like, your kids are like laying on doing a starfish in the Walmart, and you're just like, holy fuck, get in the car. And like, that's because that's all of us, right? That anybody that has come into my therapeutic practice, I'm not telling them what to do. I'm getting them back to the best parts of them, because they know what to do with their own babies. They know way better than me or anybody else knows what their kids need, when they need it, how they need it, all those kind of things. My job is to get them back to the best parts of themselves. And if there's been a paucity in the learning of that process, like their models weren't awesome or they've been told they're shitty, then that's the work that we have to do to be like, okay, just a second. This is how much you're loved and needed. And the only thing that your baby needs is to be reminded of that again and again and again. And when they push back, it doesn't mean you're screwing it up. It means that they just need the anchor to stabilize even further. To set limits, to set boundaries, to get them back on course. And when we give that permission to parents that you're going to mess this up sometimes, even those of us who claim to know a little more about parenting than the average bear, we don't also know what we're doing 98% of the time. The greatest thing then comes back to this idea that our self-care, and not drinking kale and doing yoga necessarily, but really being able to take time to be still, to rest, to refuel, to surround ourselves with people that can help us get there when we can't get there ourselves, to be very careful about what we consume on social media so that we're not comparing ourselves to all the whatever dolphin assisted pool birth mothers who are lovely humans as well, but none of that is required to be a great human. Okay. And there's no right way to do it. It really is the most regulated bodies that we can show up in as parents. Our kids will be better for it.
It's so beautiful, Jody. And as you're talking, I just get this image of a parent who is sometimes messy and imperfect, which is beautiful, because it says to their kids, it's okay to be messy. Mom's messy, dad's messy. It's also all about reflecting, being able to go, hold on, like, where am I messing up? What do I need to try and shift a little bit? Like, my little girl always says to me, like, Mom, I have a very calm voice. So she's always like, Mom, you don't yell, but your eyes get really angry. And so for me, there's growth there. So it's like, okay, when we're in these moments, Tanya, breathe deeply, relax the eyes. What is your body saying right now? But I think it shows our kids that we're also learning, and that we all have our stuff from the past.
Oh my God, I say this to my kids all the time. Like, I'm new here. Did you know that I've never had 12-year-old twins before? Right? How am I doing? Like, how about give me some feedback? How am I doing? And they're like, you're terrible. This is awful. I'm like, I know, right? I'm a first timer. Give me some tips. Like, how could I be better at this? Right? I don't know, buddy, what to say here. I don't, obviously I'm getting it wrong. So let me know, right? What do we need to do better as a family? What do we need to do better? Well, I need dad to yell less. Okay. Yeah. Like, I'm with you there. That's a good intervention. And then also I know that your dad's doing his best.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I know about your dad, right? Here's why I love your dad. Here's what, and tell me this about me, right? What do you think I need to do better as a mom? Well, I really wish you would do this. And I really wish you'd do this. Okay, good, cool. I got it. Anything I'm doing right. Because I'll tell you some of the things that I love about this job. And then, you know what I mean? Like it affords that sense of like, okay, just a second here. This is a dynamic relationship. We're trying to figure this out together. We're in this relationship piece, but never doubt that I'm in control here. But let's start to talk about this, particularly as you get a little bit more verbal, right? In these mid pre-adolescent, adolescent phases, it's such a good conversation to have because it's like, yeah, you're right. I am messing this up sometime. I'm sorry for those things. Here's what I'm sorry about. Here's what I'm not sorry about. I'm not going to get it right all the time. Neither will you someday if this is what you choose to do, right? In work and business and parenting. And so let's figure out how we make this right. You know, the Gottmans do, I think, the best work in this place of generally, I mean, they start in couples more than anything, but I always remember this data, Tanya, when the greatest predictor between people who make it and people that don't in marriages, regardless of like polyamorous relationships or same-sex couples or, you know, heterogeneous couples, doesn't matter. The greatest predictor of couples that make it and couples that don't have nothing to do with how much sex you have, how much money you have, how much you're alike or different. It is your capacity to repair, which means your ability to step back in, not when, but if there's conflict, not to avoid it, right? Because that's what we tend to do. We're fine. We get the, you know, but the ability to repair it when it goes south. And, you know, the most magical words in the repair space are, I'm sorry. And they do not follow with a but, because if you but it, you erase it. And the best lessons you can ever teach your children in this place of repair is not only to apologize to them, right? Which very few of us ever come from models of having that experience. I can imagine, particularly in South Africa, but you know, in rural Alberta, that didn't happen a lot either, right? You know,
No, different generation. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the idea then is not only should we, you know, consider an opportunity to apologize to our children as one of the greatest teachable things we can do, but also apologizing to their parent in front of them. And because our houses are bigger, because our proximity is so much less, if you think about how often our grandparents modeled making up in front of their children, you know, like if they fought, everybody knew about it. If they made up, everybody knew about it. I think about that. My father lived in a 1-bedroom house, you know, with his 2 brothers. And so there was much more opportunity for proximity. And I don't mean to romanticize the good old days, because of course there were so many other things that were wrong then, but the ability to regulate emotion and understand the human connection was deeper.
Absolutely.
Because there was many more opportunities for it.
Yeah. And right there we circle back to what we mentioned earlier about those times for authentic connection, because it's in those spaces that I think our kids go, oh, this is who my mom is and this is who I am. It's in those difficult moments where I think we really, really see each other, if we are able to.
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes, you know, oftentimes this is the hardest part, but those of us with an emotional language tend to be better at repairing than those who don't have an emotional language. And historically speaking, we are much better at teaching girls, those who identify as girls, emotional words. We give them many more opportunities in their play to be emotional, to be soft, to be nurturing, to be caring than we do with boys or those who identify as boys. And that stands true today. We think we're getting better at it. But I mean, I have 2 sons and a daughter. I catch myself all the time in the nurturing ways that I do, even as I tuck them in at night still, you know, at 12 years old, right? How much more conversation I'm having with our daughter than I may with our sons. You know, the expectation of, you know, who does what jobs around the house, how much opportunities do we give them to develop an emotional language? We're better with that with girls. And so what that affords you in adult relationships then is typically those with a more of an emotional language have a capacity to repair greater. They're greater at the repair. They're greater at managing conflict and big emotion, which is why many of the Fortune 500 companies right now that have a woman at the boardroom table or at the leadership team will be more successful, irrefutably. And mostly because we've never been this disconnected. So what we need is the glue to bring us back together. Now, I always have to be careful in this space, because this is not a woman's responsibility to, you know, navigate the conflict in any relationship, but irrefutably we're better at it. And modeling, leading the charge, being able to navigate and have those hard conversations in a way that, you know, can be demonstrated to those who watch us, who live with us, let's try that again. You know, here's what I love about you. Collect and then direct. We're doing that more often in front of our kids. And if you do that more often in front of your kids, you're giving them those lessons that become really so much harder to access these days.
Absolutely. What is it about the naming of the emotions? So the Atlas of the Heart, Brene Brown, I know you mentioned her in your book. Amazing, so great. But for people listening in, what is it specifically about being able to identify between different emotional states that leads to a greater efficacy of repair?
So when you can identify an emotion, it integrates it into your prefrontal cortex. If there's just a big, messy, visceral sense of like ick, of
Mm.
yuck, and I can't quite identify what that is, that yuck tends to stay stuck. Okay. So for example, like if I think about this in severe trauma, so when I work with police officers, right, there's something that happens at a scene where they have to get dysregulated. And so they flip their prefrontal cortex out of the way. Cause I don't need you to know your PIN number, your bank card, and like how to identify a black bear from a brown bear. What I just need you to know in that moment is how to, conduct CPR or keep somebody safe and fight, flight, and freeze, so you're on hyperarousal. Integrating that experience later, if you just don't do anything with it, which often happens historically, or you just drink, or everybody says I'm fine, it gets stuck. Now that's not a bad thing if that happens once or twice to you. It doesn't necessarily debilitate you because you just suck it up and you move on. If that happens again and again and again, it's a cumulative experience, which means your body continually thinks that it's in danger because those things are stuck. If you can identify the feeling, and we've understood this from a neurophysiological perspective, particularly naming it in the left prefrontal cortex allows us to integrate that experience. So naming it from from a verbal perspective and a visceral perspective engages both of those parts of the brain, and then it integrates it. Okay. So if I can say to you, I felt so scared, I felt so embarrassed that I didn't get to the scene on time. I felt so much shame. I felt so much angst because that baby was wearing the same jammies as my baby has at home. When you can name that, I can say, okay, look at me now, right? That wasn't your baby. You were there to serve a 3-year-old who was on scene. That was your job and you did it beautifully. Yes, but they died. Tell me more. Do you understand? I'm integrating that process, being able to describe it. And if you struggle to be able to sort of describe it, which is often what the work of therapy, right? If I can bring you through that a little bit and guess at what that might have felt like, we can start to give names, labels to what that was like. Because you'll feel it. You'll know it if I get it right. Oh my God, you felt embarrassed. No, fuck. I felt shame. So you try to get that a little bit righter, which means then it just kind of like names it and it tames it into that piece of your brain that then just incorporates it. Does that make sense?
Oh man, Jody, what a beautiful description. Just beautiful. Yeah, you did that in such a gorgeous way. So really, when I think about it with our kiddos, this is what we're doing. Is it exactly what you were saying earlier with our boys and our girls? We are, as much as possible, opening up their world by really trying to figure out the kind of the delicacies of what they might be feeling and seeing.
Yeah, wondering about it, right?
Yeah,
You don't have to get it right. Like that must have been really hard. And that's the acknowledgement piece. When my daughter comes home and she's like, everybody hates me. I'm quitting hockey. They all started a rumor about me today. This is the most terrible thing that's ever happened. Or my son says to me, nobody wants to play with me. Can never find my people. What we often want to do right away is fix it. Okay. Like, did you sit on the buddy bench? Did you look approachable today? Like, were you being a jerk? We're really trying to get them out of it. Instead of saying these 3 words, which saves my ass all the time. Tell me more. What was the hardest part? What made you the scaredest, And then really sort of filling in those spaces. Oh, so it felt so lonely. You wondered if you were ever going to fit in. God, there must be were you embarrassed that nobody picked you on the team today? And you'll know kind of when you get it right, right? And what you're doing is then you're labeling emotions for that visceral sense of what's happening in the body. And of course, we don't want them to feel that. So there's always coming up the other side. It's not like you're going to stay in this cesspool of shitty emotion forever, but it's like you name it, you tame it. When you can't address what you don't acknowledge. And I often say this, I talk about this in Feeling Seen. When you are acknowledged, you rise. And it can take 0.7 seconds, or you can sit in that for days, particularly if it's heavy duty trauma or grief. But it often doesn't take much to just simply acknowledge it and then, move up the other side.
Oh, it's beautiful. And that acknowledgement, it's huge. It's really where it starts. Yeah. Jody, as you're talking, I had a memory of, I had foster kids before, my 2 little girls now.
Wow.
And I remember we were with the kids for 4.5 years. They were from Enoch. And they were a sibling group, and one of the little boys, he wasn't that little actually, he was about 12, and he was a bigger kid. He was destroying his bedroom. Everything was down, holes in the wall, posters had been ripped down, bookcase was over, and I was in the room but back away from him. And I'd been saying different things, all of the rest, and there was just this moment where I looked at him and I said, Dan, you're feeling so sad. And he looked at me, he stopped, and he just burst into tears. And you're right, when I get it wrong often with my
Often.
girls. And
Yeah.
I have one kiddo who's like, she's highly sensitive, and she's like, don't use validation on me. She hates it when I name her feelings. But in that moment with that kid, it just came from this place where I could see him in that moment and he felt seen. And the whole trajectory of what was happening changed. He started crying, he
Melted.
got down on the floor, and we were good.
Yeah, and you have access to the best parts of him, right? So when
Yeah.
he's in destroying those things, he's lost access to the best parts of him, not his ability to be great. He's lost access to it. And our only job as parents is to get back into that place of access to our babies, right? That often looks like getting eyes, validating their feelings, giving them a drink of water. If they're so far gone that they've lost access to language, then you need to shut up too, because if you can't produce language, you cannot process it. So if your kid is verbal and they get really dysregulated and start to hiss or growl or make guttural sounds, you know, those it's like when you've been in a bar fight and you lose access to all your language, all you can do is like you know, it's the same thing. And it's not like you have had a stroke, like you still have the ability to speak, you just lost access to it. And so when you get that deep, what you want, or when you see a baby get that deep, or they start to urinate or defecate or do any of those kind of things that just like it's complete loss of control, it is stopping speaking is the first order of practice, because they can't produce language at that moment. You know, we tend to do stupid shit like this, like, you're in the red, stop, you're not making good choices, use your words, like fuck off. Like it's so, because they can't process it. So everything in our power to keep them safe, whether that means restraint or in the room, like I don't know, whatever situation it would be, right? But you stay present. And as soon as they can tell you to fuck off, or that, you know, they hate you or whatever, now you're in business, because we at least have access to the prefrontal cortex. I know that the Broca's and the Wernicke's area is now online. Okay. So I might say things just like you said here. Oh my, this sucks, dude. You're so scared, buddy. I'm scared too. Or I'm, you know, whatever. And then when that comes back online, oftentimes the next thing I do is offer a food or a drink. Why? Because you can't chew and swallow with a flip lid. Neurobiologically impossible. So it's not a reward. We've often used food, drink, whatever as a reward. I am using it as a skillful device to get you back to me. Because as soon as I can get you to speak calmly, you're safe and so am I. So I might say things like, oh man, you know what? Let's get some juice and talk about it. Do you want some juice? They're like, I hate juice. Do you have any pop? Yes, sir. And like, it doesn't matter to me. Like I will die on the pop hill. It doesn't matter to me. Right. Like, and oftentimes we've been trained to not die, you know, like we're like, I said juice or nothing. This isn't a restaurant. Like just zip it, Susan. And if you don't have pop, that's okay. You can be like, oh buddy, I wish I did. All I have right now is orange juice, maybe some water. Like what feels better? Right. And it feels like you're placating or condoning the behavior. None of that is true, because it's not if I'm going to teach, it's when. I want to get you back home first, because that's the only place that you will learn. So particularly if you won't do that, I'll have a cookie or a snack or something that can kind of like get you chewing and swallowing. When kids do that, they then usually take a deep breath like this. You also can't do that when you're dysregulated. So that's a cue to me that now you're safe and so am I. And then I can start to teach. What happened here, Buck? I can see this is a really, holy moly, you're mad at somebody or something. This doesn't feel fair. Yeah, you know what? This fucking... So if I were to say then, we don't say the F word in this house, what happens to the lid? It's not the time yet. You're right. You don't say the F word in our house. That is the rules. They know it. So do you. But this isn't the time to teach that, because they do not have access enough yet to be taught. So I'm going to say, okay, let's take another minute. Oh my gosh, this was a tough one. What happened here, Mela? Well, you said I couldn't do this I'm never going to get to see my mom again if you don't. Okay. That it would be scary in your body if that's what you heard me say. I'm so glad you told me that. Holy smokes. All right. That part's not true. I promise you. To the best of my ability, we are going to connect to your mom. And I missed it. So what do we need to do here, right? To start to slow this down. Well, okay. Do you think we should clean it up? Yep. Let's do this together. Do you think we can apologize? Is there anybody that needs to be apologized to? Yes, but I don't know how, which is often true. If nobody's ever apologized to you, you can't give it away. So we do stupid stuff like this all the time. You need to apologize. Jesse, you need to apologize to Jackson. And they're like, I'm sorry. And you're like, say it like you mean it. If nobody's never said to them, look at my eyes, Jesse, mommy is so sorry. They don't have the capacity to give that away. So you sometimes have to model it. Okay, Jess, come here. This is what I might want to say to Jess. Can you just stand beside me while I do this? You tell me if I get it wrong, okay? So I might say, Jackson, Jesse and I just want to say, we've been talking about it. And Jesse feels really bad about what happened today. Is that right, Jesse? Yeah. And if he could, he'd want to apologize. He might want to say something like, I'm so sorry for telling you you're a fat cow, or whatever the deal is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to navigate it. And no doubt sometimes they'll jump in and be like, yeah, but I still think you're okay, come here, look at me, right? And so it's that ability to sort of teach and model that you can imagine. The more access we lose to our children in terms of proximity and looking at them in the eye, we are also losing these opportunities to walk them through emotion, because you don't have a script for how to do that unless somebody shows you. You're not born with empathy. You're not born with kindness. You're not born with the ability to apologize. Somebody has to show you. And the more proximity we lack proximity to people who are calm and regulated, less access to grandparent-like figures, less access to siblings, less access, all of those things that offered those opportunities have become, statistically speaking anyway, less and less available to many, many, many of us. And so the consequence, or the result of that then, is what we see: significantly more dysregulation.
Jodie, I love how you just explained how we walk our children home. I could talk to you all day, but I know we're going to finish off now. Just keep you here for another few hours. The kids on the sleepover will be just fine. Jodie's book, Feeling Seen, goes into tons more detail. And it's just such a beautiful read. Whether you're a mom, a dad, just not a parent, this is honestly probably one of my new favorite books. It was so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And it looks at it from a much wider cultural and community perspective, and then you bring it right back into people's homes too.
Well, thank you. It was so great to finally get to do this. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so fun. And hopefully we chat again soon.
Yes, I'd love that.
Thanks, Jodie.